Welcome back, warriors, to the worst fighting game, my never-ending journey to find the very best of the very worst. So this week, I plan to take on the obscurity of Mirage Entertainment's Theater of Pain, their third and final fighter after their two failed attempts at representing robots ravaging each other. But I couldn't get it to work on my PC, so yeah, screw it, it's Dino Rex time! While not exactly known for thoughtfully designed mechanics like Capcom or technology-pushing arcade hardware like Namco, Dino Rex's developer, the Taito Corporation, got by during the 80s and 90s by being really weird. Kiki Kai Kai, Growl, the Sonic Blastman game that you physically had to punch, and of course the Rastan series. They did make several attempts at fighting games as well, but for reasons we'll dig into, they never quite got that KO punch they were looking for, which they're now gonna need if they want to knock Tai, Kato, and the other guy from atop their sweaty, digitized throne. Fortunately, one of their fighting games just might be able to do that, but not with a punch, but with a slow, awkward tail swipe straight from the Cretaceous period, or, more accurately, 2500 years BC. But we won't know for sure until we can get these ancient multicolored creatures in the ring. Now, while Taito may not have had the best reputation in the late 80s or early 90s, they are quintessential whenever you talk about Japanese gaming history, and even well beyond that because they were the ones who developed Space Invaders. To say this kickstarted the entire arcade industry worldwide wouldn't be an understatement, and while they rarely produced anything else that had the same impact, shmups logically became their bread and butter. So, in 1991, a team at Taito who had previously developed the two shmups you see here started up their third title, and again decided to stick with what they knew, but wanted to add an additional spice from around 65 million years ago. This earliest form of the project was going to feature a playable helicopter, which would, and I'm hazarding a guess here, fight off waves of dinosaurs in the traditional shmup style. However, once Capcom's Street Fighter II released to pretty much universal acclaim and rejuvenated the entire arcade industry, Taito's plans would suddenly change. The team then decided to retool what they had into a one-on-one fighting game, and the results pretty much speak for themselves, as Dino Rex is often cited as one of the poorest attempts to try to capitalize on the whole white-hot genre that was the button basher. When this originally released, though, it pretty much came and went without much fanfare, and it's only over the last 15 years or so, through the wonders of emulation, that people were able to discover just how unconventional it is. The team who made it obviously had zero experience when it came to designing melee fighting mechanics, and the fact it originally started as a shmup is pretty apparent in the first 5 seconds you actually start playing it, as everything feels just incorrect. What's funny though is that with it being unburdened by genre staples, it meant that Dino Rex absolutely has some charming aspects to it, so much so that a small but passionate community, or at the very least ardent admirers, have since sprung up in Kosoge circles. Not sure if that fact helped move the needle much in convincing Hamster to add it to the Arcade Archives line back in 2023, but I suppose it didn't hurt its chances either. So while the gameplay is of course the biggest issue, there's no denying that Dino Rex certainly has a very distinctive art style, and also an eclectic soundscape. So allow me to start gnashing my teeth as I tear into its... Listen, I can't lie to you, it's very difficult to look at Dino Rex and not compare every single aspect to Primal Rage, but that really wouldn't be fair considering these dinos predated Rage by 2 whole years. But I'm still gonna compare it here and there. Like, man, you take one look at this thing and you can't help but go, oh, this is gonna be rough. However, a lot, but not all of Taito's games actually look like this sort of grimy, messy, washed out graphical style that could show off minute little details but lack the colorful, appealing nature of games from Capcom or Konami. The dinos, as you can see, are mostly done up with drab, muted colors which really don't excite the senses, do they?
And browns and beiges and dark browns and light browns and browns and beige.
That is, of course, except for the biggest, chunkiest boy in the game, the tyrannically rotund Tyrannosaurus Rex. He's the only selectable fighter whose default color sort of stands out, but also makes him feel very toy-like, which shouldn't be too surprising as the moment-to-moment gameplay very much feels like someone mashed two dinosaur action figures together and filmed it, which I think is probably how Taito actually developed this thing. Anyway, let's run down the rest of the quote-unquote cast because it will not take very long. There's only 5 other selectable creatures, making for a total of 6, and I'm sorry, but that's pretty inexcusable for 1992, but at least it's still 3 more than Pit Fighter, to be fair. There's the Allosaurus, followed by the good old Triceratops, Pacliocephaliosaurus, and technically that's it, but I did say 5 others, yeah? That's because the last 2 characters are clones with some extra crap stapled to their heads. Suffice it to say, all of them lack the panache and style of a lot of other characters you saw in fighting games at the time, and that's partially because here they're not really the stars of Dino Rex. The story is more about the humans who apparently lived alongside the dinos and control them as their riders/trainers, so it leans more into a Pokemon style with the humans barking out orders and cracking whips in the foreground. The main goal is to defeat the CPU-controlled Tyrannosaur and his rider, where you're then rewarded with some type of Amazon Queen. Amazon Queen. Now, you know what? I'll just let the intro tell the rest of this gripping tale. Some of clay figures discovered in the ruins of South America assume dinosaurs on which mankind ride. From this, some were of the option that mankind and dinosaurs lived together. A battlefield existed there. That was the world controlled by Amazons. In this place, the man of the other tribes strive for the queen once of a year. At that time, a man who proved that his dinosaur was stronger than the other men was able to obtain the queen. And a year of being the world master was reserved for him. The king was called Dino Rex. So, in reality, the dinosaurs are presented much more like animals, just a means to an end, rather than hyping them up as our superior overlords or gods like Primal Rage did. This also means there's no unique endings, just the same one as you always control the human character, so it really doesn't matter who you pick. The last thing I have to mention, of course, is the sound, which really, well, it's bad. The dinosaur sound effect's great on the ears, and that's putting it nicely, and many are clearly not from sources that even come close to sounding dinosaurian. Like, I get how many animal roars are often mixed together to produce something that does sound dinosaurian, but that's not what Taito had in mind. You know what Taito also didn't pay much mind to? I'm just gonna come right out and say it, Dino Rex barely feels like a fighting game at all, as I think the team that made it took only a passing glance at Street Fighter 2 or anything SNK was doing, and didn't even implement that. You have only 2 attack buttons, which I think may be a holdover of when this was a shmup, with one controlling punches while the other kicks. Well, it sorta does, but for most of the cast, it just performs tail swipes. Pressing up makes you jump, of course, which is something I would be saying to you if this wasn't Dino Rex. No, pressing up roars, which if you keep doing will fill the stocks of your power meter, which we'll get to in a bit. So how do you jump? Well, you have to press down, then up quickly, and even then you can only perform a neutral jump as there's no universal way to jump forwards or backwards. Again, kinda. Pressing back does nothing except walk backwards, which then begs the question, how do you block? The face buttons don't, holding back clearly doesn't, neither does pressing start, which only realistically leaves one option. You press down to block. This setup is so unintuitive and really makes Dino Rex hard to enjoy off the bat, and even long after that. Each dino, of course, has different animations and normals, but they only have a few special moves each, and while their main one is helpfully shown on the select screen, a lot of them are done via 360 motions or like 2040 motions, which, is pretty bizarre. Fortunately, there is a highlight or two amongst all these lowlights, with one of them being that power meter I mentioned earlier. You start off each round with it fully maxed out, and pressing punch and kick together launches your dino buddy with a forward jumping attack, which happens to be the only way you can do one. If you connect with this, and believe me, it's not easy, it sends your opponent flying backwards, where if you keep mashing both buttons together, it extends the combo to 3 big attacks, and honestly, looks pretty spectacular, especially when you smash through some of the scenery. Now, if you don't have 3 stocks of the power meter, it's really not worth doing as the damage is minimal at best. You need all 3 stocks to make a difference, and fortunately you can roar to get all those power bars back. Now, there's no real variety to this system, and your opponent has no way to counter it aside from blocking the first attack, but for 1992, this really is a spectacle. I actually wish Primal Rage had background destruction like this, as it would have sold the might and size of the creatures a lot more effectively. This mayhem also leads to another much smaller system, which are usable weapons that are produced from the destruction, which mostly come in the forms of logs or giant bones. These are typically one-use only weapons, but they do a hefty amount of damage, except for the Tyrannosaur, who only ever eats them instead of swinging them, so I guess he is not too pressed about actually winning matches. Speaking of not winning matches, in the very rare circumstance that a fight ends in a draw, the dinosaurs take a back seat as the humans then duke it out to see who gets the match point. These guys, who literally are just Rastans with masks, have secret Street Fighter style special moves, and it's probably one of the niftier but least known aspects to Dino Rex. Coupled with that, we have the bonus rounds that happen in between matches, and damn, it's here where you can really see those shmup origins shine. A cutscene explains that some Amazon babe hops you up on goofballs, where you then proceed to have a trippy, playable dream of your chosen dino rampaging in the modern day. Yeah, wipe out all the cops, helicopters, and civilians until you can destroy a building owned by an evil businessman. This is such a random inclusion, but is also one of the main things that gives Dino Rex its indescribable charm. Like, who thinks, oh yeah, the bonus stages should just be Rampage. That's good, we're crushing it here, team. And that's really it in terms of mechanics. There are some slightly more advanced systems like attacking your opponent while they're prone that, while neat, I don't think are particularly useful, while some others I don't even believe were intentional on Taito's part. But of course, it's a 1-2 punch or claw swipe of negatives for Dino Rex, as while the mechanics and control layout have their issues, there's another area that's pretty problematic, which of course is the If Taito's intent was to put you in control of giant, slow, lumbering thunder lizards, they nailed it. None of the controllable fighters in Dino Rex feel good to play, as very few of their attacks give the impression they were deliberately designed to be responsive or even be clear as to what their function is. It's just a lot of wild flailing of the limbs with very little rhyme or reason to it, and I think if they had gone with a more standard control template, back to block, ducking, jumping, and at least 4 attack buttons, you'd be able to make some sort of sense of all this madness, but there's not much point in wishing for that now. The speed of everything is also a problem. Walk speeds are super slow, and some sequences are over-animated, like when dinosaurs get knocked down, while others are too fast, like some specific special moves and normals. There's even more weirdo shit on top of that, like certain dinos doing more damage to other dinos than others. Like, for example, the Triceratops can dish out more damage to the T-Rex than the rest of the other selectable dinosaurs. Like, what sense does that make? But honestly, the worst thing about how Dino Rex feels is simply crossing over to the other side of your opponent, and that's because it's not something you can actually do. Every time you get tossed or manage to jump over your saurian foe, an automatic animation kicks in with both fighters slowly moving back to their original neutral positions. Every single time. This makes matches so much slower than they need to be, and I really don't understand the intent behind this. Even if you win a round with a throw, the victor has to waddle on over to the correct side. Like, why? The match is done. I'm tired of it. Anyway, this is certainly a battle of extremes. Like, for every fun, goofy thing Dino Rex does, it does 3 or 4 really annoying things to counteract that. Like, it's really unfun to play, but then there's this weird desire that takes hold of you to just keep playing. I guess just to see how low it can go and to see the next English-riddled cutscene. But how will that translate to topping the tower of terribleness that is ruled by Pit Fighter SNES? You really want to try and like Dino Rex for some reason. The premise is so stupid it's amazing. The bizarre time-hopping cutscenes and bonus rounds hypnotize you with dinosaurnosis, and the awe-inspiring combo attacks are absolutely worth experiencing at least once. But these super unappealing graphics, annoying sound effects, unintuitive mechanics and control layout, and sludgy slow feel are huge knocks against it. Like, if you consider yourself a massive fan of dinosaurs and ironically or even unironically enjoy garbage like Jurassic Park Warpath, Dino Rex just may be your thing. But if not, you're most likely going to find this to be one of the worst playing arcade fighters ever made. I mean, it's up there for me, but deep down, I'm still glad it exists. Just looking at it makes me picture its key art that invokes the crazy dinosaur fantasy paintings of the 80s and early 90s, like this Boris Vallejo one I had on me wall back when I was but a young skele-lad. I'll never be as cool as that again. Anyway, where does that leave us? Well, while this game is the king of the dinos, it's not quite the king of the worst fighting games, although it's still pretty damn close. So that's why I'm making it our newest Grand Trashmaster. So, Pit Fighter, you've won yet another match, and against a gaggle of dinosaurs, no less. But maybe we should pit you against a foe that's more on the same footing, that utilizes many of the same techniques, and hell, even has a similar amount of selectable characters. Maybe what you need to face next is the